Gold Rush Girl, and we are up to chapter 40. Sam went to the starboard doors. I went to the port side ones. Each door had an iron door handle and an empty keyhole. Taking hold of one handle, I pulled. The door opened with ease. In such faint light as there was, I could see at once that no one was in the room. But there were two beds, one to either side, and a small table and chair. On the table, another empty whiskey bottle, a glass. The ship's movement made it roll back and forth. One of the beds had rumpled blankets, suggesting that someone had recently slept there. Had Jacob been there? The whiskey bottle told me otherwise. I moved to the next door, opened it, and found the same emptiness, but with no evidence that anyone had been there. I went to 4 more staterooms. All of them were the same, uninhabited. I glanced across the way. Sam was opening and shutting doors. He shook his head. His staterooms were just as bare. The 6th door I tried to open refused to budge. I yanked harder. It stayed shut. "Sam!" I hissed. He hurried to my side. I gave another pull with no results. Sam understood. The two of us now gripped the iron doorknob with 4 hands and yanked once, twice, with all our strength. With an ear-splitting screech, the door ripped out, bringing part of the frame with it. I peered in. Sitting up in one of the beds, with a look of amazement on his dirty face, was my brother Jacob. I tell you true, my first thought was, he looks so young. "Tori!" he cried, jumping up. His face was pale, his clothes were rumpled and torn, no shoes were on his feet, but the joy and relief on his face when he realized it was me was everything I could have wished. When I rushed forward and threw my arms about him, he burst into tears, but all the same managed to say, I never thought you'd come." "Of course I would," I returned like a proper book heroine. "This is Sam, my friend. We'll talk later. We need to move fast. So come quiet and come fast." From then on, all of our efforts were bent on getting free from the ship. "Follow me," whispered Sam, leading the way. Then came Jacob, then I. Once out of the stateroom, we hurried toward the companionway steps, the same upon which we'd come down. Sam went up the first few risers, turned, and held out his hand. Jacob took it. They started up. That's when we heard, from directly overhead, steps moving about on the main deck, heavy, irregular steps, as if the one walking was unsure of his direction. Sam pointed up and, speaking softly, said, "The man we saw, he's about." I understood. It was the man in the wheelhouse cabin, the one who had been in a drunken stupor, the one with the Colt pistol on his chest. The noise we'd made when ripping open the door to the room in which Jacob was being held must have woken him. Sam made a motion which told Jacob to back down the steps. He did so quickly. I too retreated. Then the 3 of us stood in the dim light, looking up, straining to listen, not daring to move or make any sound. A garbled shout came from above. "Somebody here? I heard you. Who the devil are you?" I made a quick decision. Whispering to Sam, I said, "Stay with Jacob. I'll use the forward companionway. Go up and try to get the man's attention. Lead him away. When I do, bring Jacob up to the deck and get him to Thad." "But—" "Do it," I said, without thinking how abrupt I must have sounded. My sole excuse is that I was not going to be thwarted in my rescue of Jacob, and if anyone should take the greater risk, it must be I. Leaving Sam and Jacob, I raced along the 'tween deck until I came to the forward steps. Once there, I dashed up as fast as I could and stepped out onto the deck. As soon as I did, I spun about and looked toward the stern. By the light of the lower lantern, I saw the broken-nosed man standing there, the one we had seen in the wheelhouse. Clearly having trouble standing upright, he was stumbling about, showing every evidence of being thoroughly drunk. Even so, in one hand, he was gripping his Colt pistol, waving it in the air. In the other hand was the lit oil lantern. He was holding it over the companionway, trying to see below. "Who's there? Come on up. Do you hear?" He pointed his wavering pistol. "I'm right here," I shouted from behind him. With a heavy lurch, the man managed to swing about and drop into a stooping posture. From under his brows, he stared in my direction, his eyes squinting, his vision suggesting it was not too clear. Were you calling me? I shouted, swaying from side to side, his head thrust forward, but the man stayed in place. I was certain he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing and hearing, which is to say, me. Come over here, you, he yelled, making a summoning gesture with his pistol. His speech was all slithered and slurred. If you're trying to get me, I returned, you'll have to come where I am. He seemed to be struggling to see me because his body continued to waver and his head, bird-like, moved side to side as if he were adjusting to the light. He also held his lantern higher to see me better. Who the devil are you? He cried, and what are you doing here? He did not appear to recognize me. Come closer, I said. I'll answer you. You've got no bloody business being here, the man bellowed, extending the arm with the pistol in my direction. I can shoot you, and I will, and I can. He had yet to move from where he was. Trying to coax him nearer, I stepped backward, moving in the direction of the ship's bow, though never taking my eyes from him. But one time when I moved, he lifted his pistol and fired it straight into the air. The explosion was thunderous, and it made me cower, and it set my heart pounding. It took the greatest effort for me to remain there and not flee. The man began to advance upon me, his lantern swinging wildly and his body staggered side to side. Since he kept his pistol pointed more or less in my direction, I was all too aware that he could pull the trigger at any moment. Needing to lure him farther toward me, I continued to back up, keeping an eye underfoot so as not to trip over something on the cluttered deck. It worked. As I retreated, the broken-nosed man moved in equal measure, numb-footed steps. That was when I saw, out of the corner of my eye, just what I was hoping for. Sam, now a good way behind the man on the deck, emerged cautiously from the aft companionway. What's more, I could see Jacob on Sam's back, clinging to his neck. Dim though the light was, I could see my brother's frightened eyes staring at the drunken man. The man with the pistol was so intent on looking at me, he did not look behind. I'll kill you, the man shouted, waving the pistol while taking more clumsy steps in my direction. I will, he shouted. I edged backward, only to have the man come forward more. Sam rose up fully from below. Once he was free of the steps and fully on deck, he moved with silent speed to the port side of the ship. I don't know how or where he found the strength, but he climbed atop the rail with Jacob still holding on. Then Sam grabbed a spar line and hoisted himself up, Jacob with him. Next moment, Sam, with Jacob still clinging to him, swung out and away from the ship, dropped and disappeared. At the same moment, I heard Sam shout, Dad! I heard a splash. My thought, was Dad there? The man who was stalking me also must have heard. He spun about and looked to see who had made the call and splash. He was too late. Sam and Jacob were not there. All I wanted to do was see where Sam and Jacob had gone, if they were safe. But the man who was stalking me now whirled around and extended his wavering arm and pistol in my direction, and then pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. I ducked, but I need not have done so. His aim was undirected. I have no idea where the bullet went, or even if it was close to me. Seeing he hadn't struck me, the man, now furious, charged forward, as though intent on striking me bodily with his pistol. That was when his foot became entangled with something on the deck. Doddering to begin with, he now fumbled forward and fell. As he fell, he extended his hands forward. They struck the deck. That caused the pistol to fire up another shot. Another wild miss. But alas, the lantern he had been holding in his hand struck and shattered, spewing oil all about. In an instant, a flash of flame shot up, a brilliant orange-red geyser, 2 or 3 feet high. Wherever the oil spill, fire began to spread with a violent speed. Despite his stupefaction, which means like being stupefied, which means being like just completely shocked and stunned, the man grasped what was happening. The blaze was spreading. Panically, he pulled himself up on his knees, dropped the pistol, and began to swat at the flames with his bare hands. It was to no avail. The inferno grew, disgorging black plumes of smoke that became part of the night. The look on the man's face, made scarlet with the light of the fire, was full of dread. I didn't stop to see what else the man did. Realizing that he was no longer watching me and that his gun was out of his hand, I raced to the topgallant rail and scrambled up, my terror no doubt giving me extra strength. In seconds, I was standing atop the rail, waving my arms for balance. I glanced back. The fierce fire was spreading, mounting. "Thad!" I shouted without looking. I jumped off the ship into nothingness, even as I had the thought, I can't swim. Oh my gosh. Chapter 41. How long did it take me to reach the water? It seemed forever. It felt no more than half a second. If that's a contradiction, so be it. All I know is that I hit the cold water hard, painfully so, and instantly began to sink. Sputtering, struggling for breath, my arms wild in their motion, I somehow rose up to the surface. I struggled and flailed and sank. But then I was grabbed by hands, followed by a grip around my shoulders, which pulled me up. It was Thad, in the water at my side. It was Thad who held me. Such was my trust that I stopped struggling. For some moments we floundered, but he supported me. The next thing I realized was that the Sadie Rose had come, and many hands, Sam's, Jacob's, and Thad's, were dragging me and shoving me up onto the deck of the ketch. I lay on the little ship, spewing and dripping water, gagging, while Jacob thumped on me, on my back, far too much. I was soaking wet and cold and no doubt trembling. I was aware our little ship was drifting, but mostly I knew I was alive, and I knew my dear brother Jacob was next to me. As I lay there, I managed to say, "Are you all right?" "Uh-huh," he said, but his eyes, I realized, were not on me, but on something else. Puzzled, I shifted and pulled myself around to see what he was staring at. I could hardly believe what I saw. Not so very far away from us, the Yankee Sword was engulfed in fire. It was as if we were seeing a gigantic red rose, a rose twisted and turned in agony, as petal-like flames spurted in all directions, creating a radiance that pressed and poked into the darkness of the waning night. Masts and spars were fingers of fire, illuminating rising clouds of scarlet smoke. The air was thick with the smell of burning wood and tar and canvas. The heat of the fire, even at a distance, was hot upon my face. All I could hear was a crackling and hissing, the sound of the ship being consumed by the fire. In truth, the Yankee Sword's hull, long, low, and black, lay altogether motionless now, lifeless, midst the frenzied fire. It was Sam who cried out, "They're coming back!" "What?" "The Yankee Sword crew!" The light of the burning Yankee Sword, helped by the growing dawn, enabled me to see two jolly boats coming from the direction of the city. They were full of men, perhaps as many as 4 to each, straining at multiple oars, moving rapidly toward the Yankee Sword. But as I watched, one of the jolly boats began to slow down. It was as if only then did the crew realize that their ship was doomed. Then one of the boats, as if under command, turned toward the Sadie Rose. We had been too intent upon the burning ship. It took but a moment for us to realize they were now racing towards us. Thad leaped to haul up the sail. Sam tore aft to grab the tiller. I was still too dazed and out of breath to lend a hand. Jacob, in his own state of panic, was of no use whatsoever. The boom swept over my head. Our ketch heeled over. We tacked away from those rowboats. I knew we were now moving, but I also realized we were not moving too fast. The jolly boat, however, was without doubt coming right towards us with great swiftness, her multiple oars working in unison, propelling her forward at great speed so that white foam curled before her sharp prow as before a high-nosed shark would. I saw that a man was standing in the bow of that boat. The light of the fire allowed me to see his white head of hair and his beard. I recognized him, Captain Littlefield of the Yankee Sword. He must have seen the Sadie Rose when we were sailing about the bay, connecting us to the fire. He was now coming after us. As streaks of morning sunlight began to strengthen in the eastern sky, Sam tried to sail us away from Littlefield toward the protection of the city. But we were moving much too slowly, whether because of the adverse currents or so little wind, I cannot say. Littlefield's jolly boat was not impeded by such restraints. On the contrary, her multiple oars meant she was quickly gaining on us. "You need to go faster," I shouted. "Can't," returned Sam, whose constant looking back at me told me he was well aware and alarmed by what was happening. I glanced toward the Yankee Sword. The fire on her had much subsided when I heard a great hissing sound. By the dawn's light, I watched as plumes of black smoke turned white, the white of steam. Flames shrank down. Next moment, those same flames vanished, and nothing was left upon the bay wave except smoke, which hovered over the bay like a slowly fading spirit. "She's sunk," said Thad in an awe-filled voice. "Glory be," muttered Sam. "Stop!" ordered a voice in the water. I spun about and realized that while we had been staring at the sinking Yankee Sword, Littlefield in his jolly boat had drawn much closer to us, gaining on us every moment. The captain, like a whaleboat harpooner, stood at the bow. He's going to ram us," I cried. Thad leaped up and looked back with fierceness. I had never seen such fierceness on his face before. In his hand he had a mallet, which had been left on the ketch. For his part, Sam had found a belaying pin and was clutching that as he clung to the tiller. As for me, I pulled the knife from my money belt, though what we intended to use such tools for, I cannot say if I had any idea. The notion that we, with our makeshift weapons, could repel them was absurd. Sam dropped down and tried to maneuver the boat away from the rowboat, only to shift us directly into the headwinds, which to say our boat simply ceased to move. In irons, as the sailors say, we were dead in the water. As for Littlefield's jolly boat, the multiple oars were moving her even faster, gaining on us. As she drew close, I saw Captain Littlefield bend down and then stand up. Something was in his hand. It was an anchor attached to a line. He was holding the anchor by its shaft. When his jolly boat was within 10 feet of us, he heaved that anchor towards us. Perfectly thrown, one of the anchor flukes neatly hooked our gunwale so that we were tied to him now. Then Littlefield began to draw in, pull us in, while the rowers kept their rowing. And since we were being held right in their furious path, we must be crushed. That was when I leaped forward with my knife, desperately sawing at the taut anchor line. Like an open fist, fingers of the rope sprang apart, and the line was severed. As though released from a grip, our catch sprung free. On that instant, Sam shifted the tiller hard, thereby catching the wind, and the boom swung above our heads. We heeled over at such a deep angle that the bay water began to trickle into our boat. It seemed like we were about to be swamped. But the next second, Sam turned us again and righted the boat and headed out to the open bay. The scuppers let the water flow out. Thad had found a bucket from somewhere and began to bail also. Jacob and I, making cups of our hands, worked to bail too. The more water we dumped out, the faster we moved. I looked back. Captain Littlefield and his boat was now being left far behind. "Look," I've said, "they've stopped coming." Thad stood up. "We're away," he cheered. "Hooray!" yelled Jacob. It was only then that Thad looked at me and said, "Good thing you had that knife." "Thanks, Father," I replied, and gave Jacob a squeeze. Sam steered the Sadie Rose farther away, putting more and more distance between us and Captain Littlefield and his crew. By then, we were all grinning fools. Feeling secure and out of reach, Sam made a big loop, and by the light of the blooming dawn, came around, and we were in Yerba Buena Cove. It was not long before the Sadie Rose, in full dawn, was threading her way among the ships of Rotten Row. They were so large and our boat so small, I had no doubt that we were well hidden. What had once been only hundreds of ugly, decaying vessel ships that had repulsed and frightened me now became our protection, our fortress, our wall of defense. Rotten Row had become our safety place. Okay, I'm going to stop there. So exciting. I'll read again soon.